The system's notification appeared in cold letters before his eyes. Shadow extraction has failed. Jin-Woo steadied himself. He'd had a single shot at this, and doubt had crept into his hands at the last moment, a hesitation he couldn't afford again. He pushed everything else aside and spoke with the full weight of his will. Arise. The cave's air turned frigid. A sound that was somewhere between a scream and a howl rolled through the dark corridors, deep enough to feel in the chest. Around him, the hunters went rigid, the chill crawling up their spines like a warning they didn't know how to interpret. A black hand broke through the shadow beneath Byunggu's body. It grasped the stone floor with desperate force, fingers digging in, as if the darkness behind were trying to drag it back. Then slowly, a figure pulled itself into the light. A soldier clad from head to foot in black armor, every surface drinking in the sparse illumination of the cave. Yoon-ho felt like his heart had stopped beating. He understood exactly what he was looking at. The mana that had lifted itself from Byunggu's shadow hadn't been absorbed or destroyed. It had been waiting. And now it stood before them, fully formed, radiating power that the gathered S-ranks could only stare at in silence. Jongin was the first to piece it together. His quick mind had been racing since the shadow hand appeared, and now he felt the certainty crystallize. The soldier's identity was Byunggu himself. Not a copy, not an echo. The man, in some form that defied easy understanding. Before anyone could find words, the shadow moved. Without a command from Jin-Woo, without any command at all, it turned toward Haein and raised its hands. Warm light began to flow from its palms, and the pale, motionless woman before them began to change. Slowly, color crept back into her face. Her breathing deepened. The shadow was using the highest level of healing magic it knew, because it had known people worth healing. The cameraman let out a shaking breath. He finally understood why Jin-Woo had asked him to turn off the camera earlier. He thought of what the footage would have shown if it had still been rolling, and understood the decision was not just sensible, but necessary. Some of the guild masters stood very still. They had each built their power over years of grinding struggle, had earned their S-rank through blood and effort, and now they were looking at a man whose abilities made every boundary they'd thought they understood feel provisional. The fiercer the battlefield, the stronger he grows, and the dead feed his army. Jongin asked quietly, not quite able to keep the shake out of his voice. "Can you utilize the power of the dead, Hunter Sung?" Jin-Woo nodded. He had no reason to hide it anymore, and he felt something unclenching in him at the admission, a weight he hadn't known he was carrying. He was proud of the power of the Shadow Monarch. It had carried him further than anything else in his life ever had. Yoon-ho, standing at the edge of the group, thought of the future. Not just today's battlefield, but everything that came after it. Jin-Woo himself could grow stronger without limit, and every enemy he defeated could become a soldier in his growing army. It was a power that had no obvious ceiling. He shivered. When Haein's wound closed completely and the pallor drained from her face, Jin-Woo placed his hand on the shadow soldier's shoulder. Byunggu didn't speak, but the warmth in those borrowed eyes was unmistakable. It told Jin-Woo what kind of person he'd been. He removed his hand and gave the single quiet command. Release. The shadow dissolved into the dark from which it had come. Byunggu had given his life fighting monsters. Keeping him as a soldier afterward would have dishonored that. Some things mattered more than utility. Jin-Woo lifted Haein from the ground. "Shall we go?" The cave emptied behind them as they walked. The ants, leaderless now, their queen and king both gone, had scattered to the island's outer edges. What had been crawling with thousands of them was now silent stone. The retrieval helicopter was already circling by the time they emerged. One by one, the hunters boarded. Jin-Woo handed Haein gently to Yoon-ho. "What about you, Hunter Sung? I still have things to take care of here." Yoon-ho looked at the island, at the countless ants still somewhere in its forests, and found he had nothing to say. He had watched Jin-Woo today with his own eyes. He would never be surprised again by what the man could do. Before boarding, he turned back. "Byunggu, the minion that came from him, will he have to fight on as your soldier forever?" "I released the summon. You won't be able to see him again." Yoon-ho exhaled slowly. "I'm glad." A pause. That kid, he absolutely hated fighting. he would have appreciated it. The helicopter lifted away. Their fight was over. Jin-Woo's was just beginning. Only one more level until I reach 100. He grinned and summoned Kaisel. At the Hunters Association of Japan, President Matsumoto stood before a darkened monitor and tugged at the thin strands of hair remaining on the sides of his head, a nervous habit he'd had for years, and one that was rapidly running out of material. A Korean hunter had done, alone, what Japan's finest 10 could not do together. Jeju Island was resolved. The mission that was supposed to embarrass Korea had instead revealed a power that made Matsumoto's entire strategy look like the work of an amateur. He thought of Ryuji, of the phone call before the mission. There's an incredible hunter here in Korea. Better than you? Possibly. We may have to alter our plans a bit. He had dismissed it. Ryuji was the best power analyst Japan had, and this was the first Korean hunter he had ever praised. And Matsumoto had been arrogant enough to ignore it. If he had listened, they could have cooperated with Korea and avoided everything that followed. Japan had lost more than half its hunting force in a single operation, and his position as president was now in serious jeopardy. There was only one way out. He needed Jin-Woo Sung. A Korean S-rank had been poached by another country before. It wasn't unheard of. It wouldn't be easy, given that the entire Korean public had just watched the man single-handedly clear Jeju Island, but Matsumoto was not done yet. The gears began turning again. On the eastern coast of the United States, David Brannan, head of the Hunter Command Center, the most powerful organization in America, was wrenched from sleep at an hour that no reasonable person would consider reasonable. He answered with the tone of a man prepared to ruin someone's career. His assistant director's voice cut through his irritation immediately. The video was already waiting. Brannan watched the footage twice, then sat back. The assistant director explained that they already had a file on Jin-Woo Sung, built partly in the aftermath of the Ilwon-Sung incident, which had put Korea on their radar. The file was comprehensive. Jin-Woo's father had been lost in a gate over 10 years ago. The compensation had never been paid. His mother's hospital bills had fallen to him alone for years. He hadn't joined any guild. Given the Dongsu Hwang precedent, Brannan hesitated. Poaching one S-rank from Korea had been complicated enough. 2 would be politically fraught. He is worth it, the assistant director said. Brannan thought of what he'd seen on the screen. The Shadow Army. The healing. The way the man had walked through the ant cave like it was a corridor he owned. He thought of what a hunter like that could mean for America, and he thought of the offer he could put on the table that no other country could match. Do whatever it takes, he said. Make him an offer he can't refuse. Back on the island, Jin-Woo rode Kaisel through the remnants of the battlefield, hunting down the escaped ants one by one. He found the corpses of Japanese hunters in the outer forest, brutally killed by the Ant King, left where they had fallen. He recorded the locations in his mind and moved on. His shadow soldiers reported back. The pursuit was nearly complete. He found the spawning grounds. Row upon row of eggs, nestled in the dark earth of the island's interior, the future army that would have risen from this place if the queen had lived. He summoned his soldiers to incinerate them. Then he drew the demon monarch's sword, the weapon he'd claimed after the battle in the demon's castle, and let its blue lightning scour the ground. The air crackled. The eggs burned. And then, 100. He stood still for a moment with that number in his mind. Then he turned back toward the queen's den. The Ant King's body lay where it had fallen. Jin-Woo stood over the shadow it cast and let himself settle into the calm that good extraction required. Arise. The atmosphere flickered. Black smoke rose from the shadow, taking shape, massive, armored, radiating a presence that would have sent any ordinary hunter running. The shadow knelt before him. A system prompt appeared in his vision. Elvil no rank, a rank he had never seen before. The shadow raised its eyes to him and spoke. It asked for a name. Jin-Woo thought of a science fiction novel he'd read years ago, before the world changed, about an empire built by ants, intelligent, relentless, perfect in their hierarchy. He had the name already. Beru. The shadow bowed. Jin-Woo then turned to the queen's shadow. The extraction succeeded, but immediately he felt the difference. The connection to the other ant shadows grew fainter, not stronger. The Queen had been the central node of the army's intelligence, but her power had been built for a single purpose: breeding, reproduction, the maintenance of the colony's cycle. A purpose that required a body she no longer had. Beru confirmed it quietly. The Queen's value had diminished to near nothing without her physical form. Her power was memory of power now, not power itself. Jin-Woo released her. He gathered the essence stones from the cave floor, leaving the bulk of them for the victims who would eventually come to recover this place. From Beru's corpse, he kept a single stone, pitch black, almost jewel-like in its density, heavy with a quality he couldn't quite name but recognized as significant. Then he summoned Kaisel and left the island. Kaisel landed before the Hunters Association headquarters and sent a ripple of shock through everyone who happened to be watching. Jin-Woo asked for President Go and learned he was at the hospital, checking on Haein's condition. At the hospital, President Go had just received 2 pieces of news in the same hour. Haein was stable, recovering cleanly, the powerful healing magic having done its work. And Jin-Woo's mother, who had been sleeping through the eternal sleep disease for longer than anyone had wanted to count, had awakened and been discharged. The timing landed oddly. President Go found himself tracing back through the sequence of events. The invitation to join the Jeju Island raid, extended while his mother lay in a coma, and the timing of her recovery. He felt a pang of regret that he hadn't investigated Jin-Woo's circumstances more carefully. The picture it painted was one he had been too slow to look for. When word came that Jin-Woo was waiting at the association to see him, President Go reversed direction without hesitation. Their meeting was brief and significant. Jin-Woo had eliminated every ant on Jeju Island. This meant Byunggu's body could be retrieved. President Go's relief was visible on his face, not just the political relief, but something more genuine than that. He told Jin-Woo that he wouldn't need a guildmaster's license to form a guild. S-rank hunters could form one directly through the association. Connections, President Go said kindly, really were everything. Jin-Woo absorbed this with the quiet surprise of a man who had not yet begun investigating the full scope of what his rank allowed him. They walked out together. Outside the association, a crowd had gathered, larger than either of them had expected, stretched out in both directions down the street. The scale of what had been broadcast from Jeju Island was still hitting people in waves, and many of them had come simply to be near something they'd witnessed through a screen. President Go leaned toward him and said he thought the people needed a moment. Just a moment. Jin-Woo pushed the door open. The crowd saw him and went silent all at once, as if the air had changed. He had felt uncertain about this, about being a symbol, about the performance of it, but standing here and seeing their faces, he found that the hesitation fell away. He hadn't done what he did on Jeju Island for an audience. But the people looking at him now were real, and their relief was real, and for a moment that was enough. Jin-Woo moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, clearing a path. An elderly man reached through the press of bodies and touched Jin-Woo's arm. His son, he said, was now able to rest in peace. Jin-Woo met his eyes and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, but he stayed present for a moment longer than he needed to. When he finally reached the car, the crowd was still bowing. He slid into the seat and closed the door. The vehicle pulled away slowly. He watched the faces receding through the window until they were too distant to distinguish. Then he turned forward and placed his hand on his chest, feeling his own heartbeat. He hadn't expected to feel anything like that. In the days that followed, the internet reconstructed the Jeju Island raid from every angle of footage that had survived. Discussion boards ran tens of thousands of posts comparing what people thought they had seen with what they thought was physically possible. Some were awed. Others were frightened. A few were conspiratorially hostile. Jin-Woo found he could hold the noise at a certain distance. It was about an image of him, not him, and the distance between those two things was something he had learned to use. He had applied to seal his records and was surprised to discover that the fame had outrun the paperwork. Most famous hunter in South Korea, the headlines said. He read them the way one reads weather reports, useful information, noted, set aside. 2 days after the raid, an army unit, and a team of Knights Guild hunters landed on Jeju Island with a single mission: retrieve Byunggu Min's body. They walked toward the ant cave through a landscape of dead ants. Thousands of them, fallen across every surface, a testament to the night Jin-Woo had spent completing what the raid team had started. The vice master of the Knights Guild looked at the scale of it and felt the silence of the place in his bones. At the cave entrance, a shadow shifted. The hunters raised their weapons instinctively. A figure emerged, not Jin-Woo, not any Korean. A foreigner, moving without any evident concern for the weapons pointed at him. He spoke in a language none of them recognized. One of the soldiers, nerves fraying, discharged his weapon. The bullet had no effect. The figure's eyes glowed red. He snapped his fingers. Every soldier, every hunter, unconscious in an instant. At Byunggu Min's funeral, the air was heavy with the particular grief that comes from a death everyone knew was coming, and no one was ready for. The ceremony had been opened to the public. Too many people had wanted to pay their respects, and the family had agreed. A tide of mourners passed through the parlor throughout the day. Jin-Woo came. He was recognized almost immediately, whispers spreading through the crowd like heat. He frowned. They needed to remember where they were, why they were here. He released a small, controlled fraction of his magic power into the room, not enough to threaten anyone, barely enough to feel. Just enough to make every breath feel deliberate. The room went silent. Satisfied, he continued toward the portrait. He was stopped by a woman who looked like someone had taken everything she had and left her still standing through sheer, stubborn love. Byunggu's mother. She had been the one to request Jin-Woo's attendance. "You came, Hunter Sung." "Yes, ma'am." She told him she had heard he was the one who cleared the island, who made it possible to bring her son home. She paused, composing herself, and then, "Because of you, I was able to see my son one more time. Thank you. Thank you so much." The words hit him in a place he hadn't been protecting. His own mother had worn an expression just like that, 10 years ago, when the call came that Jin-Woo's father had gone missing in a gate. He hadn't understood it then. He was starting to understand it now. As the relatives gently guided Byunggu's mother away, Jin-Woo stood in a moment of complete stillness. Byunggu's sacrifice had saved the others in that cave. His healing had kept them alive long enough to survive. And even after death, his shadow had done one final act of care, restoring Colored's face with what felt from the outside like the satisfaction of someone who had always wanted nothing more than to help. He had genuinely cared for his colleagues. The warmth in those borrowed eyes had made that clear. Across the room, Jin-Woo caught Haein's gaze. She blanched, the first non-neutral expression he had ever seen on her face, the famous mask cracking into something that looked like uncertainty and embarrassment in equal measure. She was surrounded by the other survivors of the raid team, who nodded at him with the quiet acknowledgement of people who had shared something they would carry the rest of their lives. "So she can make those kinds of faces too." He turned to the portrait. Byunggu was smiling in it, bright and uncomplicated, the face of someone who didn't have a care in the world. Jin-Woo placed his flower and closed his eyes. President Go found him there a moment later. "Did you cast some kind of barrier spell on Jeju Island, Hunter Sung?" Jin-Woo shook his head. He explained what he knew, which was nothing, because he had been gone when the Knights Guild arrived. President Go described what had happened. A mixed team of A-rank and near A-rank hunters collapsed unconscious. No memory of what led to it. No evidence of how. Jin-Woo thought of Beru. He thought of what it would look like to summon Beru in the middle of this funeral, surrounded by 10 high-rank hunters who would immediately try to fight him. He thought of what would happen to those hunters. He decided to ask Beru later. "I've never done anything like that," he said. President Go nodded. He had hoped, but not expected, a different answer. He looked deeply unsettled as he was called away by an aide. Jin-Woo walked toward the exit. Behind him, he sensed a presence following. He kept walking, curious how long this would last. Whoever it was made no particular effort at concealment, an unusual quality in someone trailing an S-rank hunter. At the van, he waited. "Are you Mr. Jin-Woo Sung?" He turned. A foreigner. Young, Western, wearing a suit that suggested someone had thought carefully about the impression it would make. Blonde hair. a smile that was sunny in a way that probably worked very well in most situations. The man reached into his jacket and produced a business card. His name, his phone number, his organization. Jin-Woo looked at it for a moment, then looked at the man. Whatever he was here to offer, the conversation was just beginning.